back for another episode of Professor Parks Talks to Her Computer. I'm going to try and talk a little faster this time. I noticed last time, come on computer, I had no timer set for myself last time and it ran to 43 minutes and I apologize for that. So we're going to try and keep this one 30 minutes or less, just like pizza delivery. So today we are talking about managing your research, gathering, and evaluating your sources. So this is in preparation for your next assignment, your literature review, which I will be going over in class this week, your new assignment, and also your topic presentation. I will be going over that assignment as well. So you should have turned in your topic essay last Sunday. That was yesterday because I'm recording this on Monday after driving 8 hours back from my dad's house. I got home like 15 minutes ago. And I'm going to comment and grade those as soon as possible so that you can prepare your topic presentation, which I will go over, which is not going to be this week, but next week. I know that sounds like it's super close, but it is just the information that you've written in your topic presentation. So you're just presenting your topic and why you chose it and that kind of stuff. So it's very short and it's very easy and you've pretty much already written it. So really all you're doing is just typing it up onto like 5 PowerPoint slides. It's going to be very short. So don't forget about that. I will post the topic presentation and literature review assignments in D2L. And like I said, I will be going over these both days in class this week. Make sure, again, that you are doing your discussion post every week and that you're doing your quiz every week because that is your, that's going to be your attendance. So make sure that you are doing that. And don't wait till the last minute because sometimes the Wi-Fi goes crazy and then if the discussion closes or the quiz closes, then you don't get credit for it. So make sure you're not waiting until 11:45 on Sunday to do those. Also, I've noticed that attendance, speaking of, is becoming an issue in class. So remember that according to the department, I am supposed to fail any student who has higher than 15% absence rate, which in this case means more than 7 absences. Some of y'all are almost to 7 absences or possibly at 7 absences at this point. So make sure that you are completing everything you should be online for attendance and that you are coming to face-to-face class when you are assigned to do that. All right, so let's jump right in here because we are at whole 2 minutes and 30 seconds in. So we're going to talk about managing your research. This was chapter 4.3. So first thing we're going to kind of talk about is scheduling your research and your writing. I don't know how much y'all like to set up schedules for things. I'm one of those people that I really enjoy having things marked down on a calendar, so it keeps me on task. Otherwise, if I just look at a due date, then I think, oh, I've got plenty of time. But there's a lot of work that goes into a lot of these different assignments, so I want y'all to make sure that you are going through and you're scheduling and giving yourself enough time to do everything. So usually the best thing to do is to look at that due date and work backwards. Think about how long it's going to take for you to do each thing. And, oh, I got an email. Think about how long it's going to take for you to do each thing and make sure you're giving yourself enough time for that. And again, don't schedule yourself way up to the last minute. Make sure you give yourself a few days just in case something happens. You can turn it in early. I'm probably going to start giving extra credit for turning things in early. So you want to make sure that you are giving yourself time for that. The way that they talked about in the book, it says, usually works best to divide your time in half. Think about half of the time for research and half the time for writing, because you never know what you're going to come across when you're doing research, if you're going to be able to find a lot of stuff, how easily you'll be able to do that. So make sure you're giving yourself plenty of time for that. Make sure you're realistic about your schedule. Think about the things that you've got to do. If there are events at school happening, don't think that you're just going to stay home and you're just going to do your homework instead of going to something fun. Be realistic about it. If you're going to visit your family, something like that. Don't think that you're going to spend your entire weekend with your family at home doing homework. I know that I wouldn't be. I was with my family this weekend and I did absolutely nothing but watch TV. So be realistic about the things that you've got going on that you can make that schedule the way that is going to work best for you. And also look at breaking down major steps into smaller tasks. So, when you say do research, in this next literature review, you've got 5 sources that you've got to have in there. So, don't think that you necessarily have to find off, on Friday I'm going to find all 5 of these. Maybe just break it down into, okay, I'm going to secure 2 this day, make sure I find 2, and then another day I'm going to find another 2, that kind of thing. So breaking things down into smaller tasks makes it less intimidating for you once you start when you start working, that you aren't looking at, oh, I have to write a huge paper. It's, I have to write an intro. I have to write, just breaking it down to smaller pieces. So staying organized and on task, which is a problem for me. I don't know about y'all, probably, because it's a problem for a lot of people. So again, creating schedule, you can do that all you want to. Sometimes people spend hours creating a schedule just because it's fun to create a schedule and they do nothing with it. So making sure you stick to it is the thing. A lot of people make excuses to procrastinate. Usually, and I will say this, and I know this is the case with me, people who procrastinate are usually afraid that they aren't going to do as well as they think they're going to do. And so they think if I keep putting it off, then I'm not giving myself the opportunity to fail. If I do badly, I would prefer to just not do it at all than do it badly. Don't think like that. Give yourself time and you can be successful. And like I said, I'm here to help you be successful. So if you're having issues with stuff, let me know. Also, unforeseen things can happen. Some family emergency could happen, God forbid. It's hurricane season. Lord knows what's going to happen with that. My sister lives on the Gulf Coast and everything's heading her way right now, but it never fails. At some point in Savannah, every year I've lived here, we've had to evacuate, or there's been some kind of issue heading this way. So there's that. You never know. The power's going to go out. The Wi-Fi goes out. All these things can happen that can cause you issues. So make sure that you're preparing for those unforeseen things. Make sure you keep a close eye on your schedule and your progress. Make sure you're keeping up with the things you're supposed to be doing when you say that you're going to be doing them. Make sure you put those important dates in your calendar. You can use your Google Calendar. I use both. I use Google Calendar and a written calendar and Post-it notes, and I've got everything everywhere. There's also a thing called a Pomodoro timer that helps keep you on task while you're working. So some of them even lock you out of everything else. So you can't go to social media, you can't look at anything other than just working on your paper. And it sets up 25-minute chunks of work with 5-minute breaks in between. So you may want to look into something like that. They have apps like that are free for a lot of different phones and things. I have one that I use. My personal process, I like Post-it notes. I have Post-it notes stuck up everywhere. And I also have checklists. I have a dry erase board. And I literally have a list of the things I need to do for this class this week. And I take great pride in getting to erase things off of that. But that's what works best for me. So figure out what works best for you, and set that system into place so you can make sure that you're staying on task as you need to be. Always anticipate those issues. You never know what's going to happen. Your resource you may want isn't available. Maybe they don't have it here at Savannah State. Maybe they only have it at Georgia Southern or something. You have to do interlibrary loan and get it sent over. That takes extra time. You may have to wait for somebody to return it. That takes extra time. So make sure that you're giving yourself time for that. Maybe you want to interview somebody, but they cancel. I've done articles for magazines and stuff where I had to interview, and sometimes you just have to chase people down, and sometimes they will just never get back to you. So, don't just assume you set up a time and they're going to be right then, and they're going to show up exactly when you want them to. Make sure you give time for that. And using it, depending on the interview, you can use interviews as an academic source for this paper, depending on your subject and the person that you're interviewing and their relation to the subject. You may need to change your thesis based on the research you've done. The more research you do, the more your idea may change and your question may change a little bit, which means your thesis may change. So you've got to take time to, if you change your thesis, you may have to go back and readjust some of the writing you've done. So give yourself time for that. Never fails that the Wi-Fi will go out, or the power will go out, or your computer will just completely crash. One of those things likes to happen, usually right before you're trying to turn it in. Make sure you're saving a backup. I have a external drive that automatically saves at certain times. There's also, if you use Word Online, you can set it up to automatically save. So every time you stop typing, it'll save, every few seconds. To make sure that, if you do that, if you use Word Online, you can actually access your paper anywhere. So you don't have to if you were to save it on an external drive, a thumb drive, you lose that, you've lost your paper. If you work at through Word Online, it's always there. It's out in the cloud or whatever somewhere. And so you can access it anywhere you are, even if you don't have a thumb drive or whatever with you. Again, make sure that you're working early enough so if you have to make any changes, it's not going to really throw off your schedule. Make sure that you keep sources. We're going to talk about research. Make sure you're keeping notes on your sources you go through, because otherwise you may quote something, but then you didn't write where that quote came from, and then you got to search through everything else and find that source again. And that is just going to be a mess. My dog is having an asthma attack. There's always some kind of excitement going on over here. If you hear that weird kind of noise in the background, that is my half pug having a breathing issue. So gathering your sources. So where you might find your sources. Internet search engines, library online catalog, and the other class for this week, I'm going to talk about searching and how to go through the online, using online databases and through the library. So I know that was part of the book that you were supposed to have read. Hopefully that you did, but that part, Galileo and everything, I'm going to go over in a different video. But we're going to talk about some of these different ones. So when you are looking at resources, think about this. Is this source relevant to my purpose? Make sure that just because it discusses something that's related to your topic does not mean that it's going to help support your argument. You want to have good sources that are going to be supporting your argument and that are relevant to your thesis. And is this source reliable? We're going to also talk about something called the CRAP test. Yes, it's a CRAP. It's an acronym for ways that you can figure out if your source is reliable. So in other words, you can't just take any source just because it mentions your topic and say, oh, well, it says something about it, so I'm going to use it. Is it reliable? We'll talk a little bit about that today. Book also talks a little bit about primary versus secondary sources. So primary sources, examples of that are this direct first-hand sources of information or data. So actual data, like from scientists, from historians, people who have actually studied things and done the work themselves, assuming that they are reliable sources. Now, I could go out and say I did the data, and I would take that or leave that if it was me doing it. But make sure that the people that are giving you this data are reliable people, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Works of visual art. I don't think that's something that people are going to use necessarily for this class, but that's considered a primary source. If you're talking about a painting, that would be a primary source. Literary text. So if you're talking about an actual book, if you're writing a paper about Jane Austen's book is considered a primary source. Historical documents like speeches, letters, diaries. So you can, branch out beyond books, just plain old books and things like that. Think about speeches. Think about things that were spoken but then written down later. That's considered a primary source. Those are words from important people a lot of times. Letters, diaries, things like that. Autobiographies, memoirs, and there's a little bit of a difference in between those things. We'll talk about that a little bit. Memoirs are more like teaching you a lesson versus autobiographies are just kind of literally sort of a list of like, this is what happened, in order. But they're both written by the people it happened to, versus if you look over here, when you're talking about biographies, that is when someone else wrote the story. So, but if it's coming from the mouth of the person it happened to, that's a primary source. Interview, so you're talking to a person that was there or has expertise in something, or other personal accounts. So if it's coming from, as they say, from the horse's mouth, then that is considered a primary source. And you want to get primary sources, as much as you can. Secondary sources can also be okay because you're making a persuasive argument, and most of the time secondary sources are making an argument about a primary source. So they maybe find a secondary source that makes the same argument you're trying to make, then that helps support your argument. So secondary sources discuss, interpret, analyze, consolidate, otherwise rework information from primary sources or writing about the primary sources. So literary criticism. So when you're talking about, say you're writing about Jane Austen, her book would be a primary source. Someone who wrote about her book and said, these are the themes and this is what it means, that's literary criticism, that's secondary source. Biographies, again, somebody else wrote somebody's life story. Reviews, movie reviews, music reviews, anything like that. Documentaries where they're telling the story of somebody else. And news reports are all considered, and that includes news articles. They're considered secondary sources. So it's talking about an event that happened, but not necessarily. It uses usually quotes and interviews and things from people who were there, but it's written by somebody who was not necessarily actually there. Both of these types of sources are good. You're going to use a mix of the two of them in your paper. So when we talk about popular versus scholarly periodicals, and I'll let y'all, these slides are going to be posted so you can read this a little bit more in depth, because like I said, I don't want to go super long, and of course my timer has gone away. Where is it? Okay. Think about popular versus scholarly. So popular is written for everybody. So you think about People magazine, that's a popular periodical. Cosmopolitan magazine, that's something that's written for everybody. Versus scholarly periodicals are going to be written for a smaller audience, and they're written usually specifically by people who have expertise in the area that the scholarly periodical is aimed towards. So there are lit journals and things like that. Psychology, I think it's called Psychology Today. That's a specific scholarly periodical for people who practice psychology, psychiatry, those kind of things. So that is written, and it's written by people who practice that themselves, and it's written for people who practice that. So you're going to look at those kind of things. Scholarly journals are going to be something that's really good as a source, and those are often also peer-reviewed, which means that doesn't mean just anybody is reading it. That means other people in that field are reading it and going, yes, I agree that this is important information, or this is not true. This has been disproven, that kind of thing. So you want to make sure that you're finding stuff that has been peer-reviewed and that is, it's written by experts, it's read by experts, it's published by experts, something that has been edited. If I wrote something and posted it myself, that's not peer-reviewed. That's just me writing. That's not an expert opinion. That's not necessarily a scholarly or reliable source. But if I write something and other people who work in the English department, other writers, that kind of thing, are reviewing what I'm saying, then that's considered peer review, and that's going to give it credence. That's going to give it more weight when it comes to being a scholarly source. So make sure that you're getting stuff that's going to be considered something like that. And there's a plane going over my apartment. So when we're talking about sources in the open web, thinking about things like Google, Yahoo Answers, web pages, wikis like Wikipedia, those kind of things. A lot of those are free, which is like, yay, that's fun. But they're also created and revised by a large group of users, and it's not necessarily something that is controlled. For example, and some of y'all have probably gone down Wikipedia holes before where you start clicking from one page to another. I ended up on the page of skunks on Wikipedia one time, and one of the captions of the picture said, "Skunks smell bad and they like pie." I'm like, okay, that's not, somebody just randomly wrote that. Anybody can edit those kind of things. So you have to think about what you're looking at, and they're not going to be as reliable if anybody can just go in and change it. So there is Google Scholar, though, which is free online, and that's something different because that is considered more of a scholarly source versus just anything that's on Google search. Yahoo Answers, I don't know if anybody uses that, but that can be a real mess. Reddit, things like that. Those are real. They can be kind of really not reliable. Blogs, especially, because nobody's editing that. That's just people posting stuff. Unless it's possibly a blog from somebody who is actually, expert or has been involved was at an event that you want to talk about, that kind of thing. That might be different. In any case, when you're talking about these type of sources like the Google searches, the blogs and things like that, check with me if it's something you think that you actually could use. Check with me and let me see before I can approve that. Don't just do it. One of the things is also talking about the source can be a good starting point to lead you to more reliable sources. Wikipedia, you cannot use that as a source. I know everything's on Wikipedia. However, if you scroll down to the bottom of most Wikipedia pages, there's going to be sources down there where they got the information to write the actual Wikipedia page. Some of those can be considered reliable sources. Just check and see where they came from and who wrote them and that kind of thing. So you could use that particular source as a reliable source, but Wikipedia is a big not happening. So the drawbacks of open web source is like you're not really when you search something, the top source, the top result may not be something that's actually reliable. There's different algorithms that happen. Search engines, they usually will just pop up. It could be having to do with ads. It's, it talks about being influenced by popularity. If a lot of people are clicking on it, then it may be the top source, but it may not be reliable. Again, advertisers, people pay to have their stuff come up sooner than others. So, you've got to think about that. You may search, you may find so many things that you don't really know how to divide it down or like kind of cut it down. So make sure that you're, filtering. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the next video. They don't necessarily they're not necessarily going to include the library's high quality electronic resources. So, think about using Galileo and things like that through the library. You're more likely to find something that most everything that you find on, I say most everything, on Galileo is going to be considered a reliable source. So start there before you start Googling things necessarily. And again, because anybody can publish anything on the web, you have to make sure the quality of the information is, you just never know what you're getting. So you have to be very careful about what you use there. So when you're talking about best ways to use things like that, limit your resources to websites that have been updated within a particular time frame. I usually say within the last 10 years, depending on your topic. It just really depends on your topic. You can limit by language or region if you're talking about a particular region of the world or the United States. You can also, like I said, Google Scholar is an example where I think there's an option where you can just click just scholarly resources and it will just pull up the things that are considered scholarly, which would be good. You can limit by file type. In other words, you could just pull up PDFs instead of web pages, that kind of thing. You may want to look at the domain type. So if you see .edu, that's usually that's a school or university site. That's usually reliable. .gov is a government site. Those are usually pretty reliable. Those are the two that you really want to look for. A site with .org can be good, but it depends on, there's a bias sometimes with the organization depending on what they're trying to do. But some, like when I used to do stuff, with the domestic violence shelter where I worked, I used a lot of .org sites, but really what they were doing is the statistics and stuff on there, they didn't do them. The CDC did a lot of them. So I really ended up going back to the CDC website and using that as a primary source, because they were the ones that actually collected the data versus using one of the sites that just repeated it. So make sure .com, .net for sure, and whatever else they got out there. Just be careful about what the domain type is. So these are some different types. I'm not necessarily going to go through these individually, but these are the different types of sources that you have through the library. So things that you can think about using there. Reference works like encyclopedias. That's what we used to have to use when I was a young person. We had to look stuff up in giant encyclopedias. So reference books, almanacs, those kind of things. Nonfiction books, those are going to be a really good source depending on if who they're written by and their topic. But especially if you find them in our library, they're probably going to be a good source for you to use. Periodicals, so that means magazines, journals, different things like that. And if the library doesn't necessarily have the one that you want, you may find it online. And they may, if they don't have it, they can request it for you and get a copy of it. So if you actually want the periodical itself, then they'll be able to get that for you. They also have government publications like reports, legislation, court documents, things like that. That might be something for you to use, especially when we're talking about, a lot of people are talking about like police brutality and court cases and things like that. So those court documents might be something that'd be, and public records might be something that'd be important to use. Business publications, like we're talking about nonprofit, and different things like that. And documentaries are also good depending on who they're made by, but there's a lot of good documentaries out there. And you can use videos, you can use documentaries as a source, because those are people who did a lot of research and a lot of work to make those pieces, and they're covering some important topics there. These are some, obviously I'm not going to read all these to you, but there are a lot of databases that are available through the library and through Galileo. So, everything from, these scholarly secondary sources. This is a lot of literary criticism and things like that, versus, LexisNexis is talking about law, a lot of law stuff, legal information. So depending on what what your paper is about, you may find a lot of different databases, that are, most everything that you find on these databases are going to be something that you can use as an academic source for your paper. So if you don't know where to start, ask a librarian. I know they're open somewhat. If not, either you can email them and tell them, hey, look, that's what their job is. They know where everything is, and they will find you what you're looking for, and they will point you in the right direction. So if you don't know, ask them. They will help you. So evaluating and processing your sources. So thinking about whether the source is relevant or not. How are you planning to use the source? What point in your essay will you use the source to support? So this is after you found a whole bunch of sources. So you don't have a stack of 20 sources. You can kind of start looking through these things and finding out if it's something that you're going to use or not. And if it's not, then just, get rid of it. That's one less thing you have to think about. Make sure it's timely, depending, like I said, the example they used was talking about technology and social media. It was saying that, an article from 2002 about technology is not going to be a good source when you're talking about stuff happening today, because that's going to be really outdated unless you're trying to use past examples. But an argument about technology back then is probably not going to be relevant today. And check when a website was last updated. Do all the links still work? If the links aren't good anymore, then that information is not good anymore. So make sure that it's something that has been updated in a timely manner. To weed out unhelpful sources, you need to skim over them. So skim means, kind of look real quick. So if you've got a book, you don't want to read that whole book. I know reading books takes time, but read the cover, read the table of contents, see what the different things that are discussed in there. Use the index if you're looking for specific words. Look at the glossary in there and the index to see if they're covering specific topic and keywords that you're looking for. Look for subtitles. Look for the big bold words, are the things that you're looking for. See if they're talking about stuff that's important to your argument. When you're talking about articles, read the abstract. A lot of these journal articles have abstracts, which is just a short summary of what that article is about. Read that. If it makes any sense to what you're talking about, then that might be an article that you want. If not, let it go. You don't need more stuff jumbling up your system there. Skim the introduction and the conclusion. Start at the front and the end and see what where they start and where they end up. Look through the subheadings. Like again, that bold type and breaks in your paper. It sees the different sections they're talking about. That all is helpful. Looking for keyword. Again, look for those keywords that are related to your topic. What's your argument? What keywords are you using? And is it in there? So these are some things to look at if the source is reliable. How thoroughly does the writer cover the given topic? How carefully do they do research and document the facts? How do editors review the work? If it's not edited, if it doesn't show that it has been edited by somebody, it's not reliable. That's just like me writing and posting it and being like, this is fact. Well, if, nobody's edited it and checked those facts, then you can't say it's reliable. What biases or agendas affect the content? Is it, if the example they used in the book, I think, was something about low-carb diets, but it was written by a company, like say, for example, you were reading an article about how low-carb diets are so helpful, but it was written by the Atkins people. Like, they sell products for low-carb diets. So they have a bias and they're trying to sell you stuff. So are they really reliable? So think about that. What about the credibility of the author and the publication? So, you think about something that's written in a magazine that just came out starting, a year ago versus a journal that's been published for 50 years. And you think about that that has a stronger history and reputation. What's the author's purpose or objective for presenting the information? Again, are they trying to sell something? Are they trying to show a bias there? Like, what is their purpose? Why did they create this? And do you believe the information will benefit the writer or the organization in any way? If it's benefiting the writer or the organization that's presenting it, then there may be a bias there and it may not be the most reliable source. So we've got different types of sources. High quality sources, those are the ones that have the most in-depth information. They're written and reviewed by subject matter experts. So those are the ones we've already kind of discussed a little bit. Varied quality sources can be useful, but they don't cover subjects in as much depth as the high quality sources. That may not have as much research and review behind them. So like news articles and things like that, they are edited, but they usually have to come out so fast that they may not be as reliable as somebody who's spent 5 months writing an article. Questionable sources are usually there to present a large readership. They're trying to bring in the title. So like if you're using an article from TMZ, it's probably not a reliable source, because they like to post, even if it's talking about a real thing that happened, they're just trying to get people to, they're trying to be, you know, flamboyant, and they're trying to get people to read them. So think about that when you're looking at your sources. Keeping track of your sources, and important to keep track of all of them. Taking notes as you go, because if you have a quote from something and you didn't write down what book it was from, or what the web page was, or whatever, and you've lost that and you have to go back and search for it, that's wasted time. So make sure you're writing down everything you need for your works cited page as you go along, so you don't have to go back and search that at the end. So this is the info that you will need later. So look for, depending on the different type of work that you're looking at, these are the kind of information, this is the kind of information you need to write down. Usually the author, the title, you know, where you found it, web page, that kind of thing. And then there's some other stuff on here too that you can, that's more specific, that I won't read to you, but you can read for yourself. So taking notes on your sources, depends on how you want to do it. Using index cards, you know, writing each individual source on an index card. That way you can organize them and stuff too. You can write quotes and all that kind of stuff down on it. You can organize them, put them in the order you want. That makes it pretty easy to do that. Research notebook, same thing, but you just put it in a notebook. Annotating your sources, that is where you actually print out articles, and you're writing stuff in the margins and things, and you write the different information directly on it. Another thing that is good to do with that, make sure that you're taking note of your access date. In other words, if you're printing out an article, what day did you print that out? What day did you pull that up? That's important for your works cited page. You can also use note-taking software. So I use Evernote sometimes, and it saves article and web pages off the internet, and I can put them into folders that stay on my computer. So then I can just pull up that folder, and it's got a whole list of links. I just click on it and just link right back to what I was looking at. So there's a lot of different note-taking softwares like that you can use. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about this in class, but talking about how to use your sources, you're going to use them through, you're going to summarize, you're going to paraphrase, or you're going to direct quote. Now you can actually highlight these things when you're going through your sources, or you can write them down, that kind of thing. Summary, you think of the difference between a summary and a paraphrase, people get confused about. A summary is taking a huge piece of information and making it small. So you're giving me a couple sentences that tell me what an entire article says. That's a summary. Versus a paraphrase is restating the same stuff, but you're using your own words, you're using your own sentence structure, but it's usually around the same length as what the source material is. So if you're paraphrasing a paragraph or a few sentences, then your paraphrase will be a paragraph or a few sentences as well. But you are using your own words and your own sentence structure, so it sounds completely different, but it's giving you the same information. That also helps you think through concepts and kind of understand it in your own way. Direct quote, obviously, quote unquote, it's word for word what you read. That's good if the person who's saying it or writing it, they express it in a way that you can't really change up, then use a direct quote. Okay, so assignments. Do your discussion post and quiz. I didn't put this on here, but just another thing that you need to start on is that topic presentation, because you will be doing those next week? Yes, next week. So again, they're going to be short. You know, it's like 5 slides at the most, 5 minutes at the most, that kind of thing. You're just presenting the same information, you know, a small amount of the same information you put in your topic essay. You're just putting it on PowerPoint slides. So make sure you start working on that. Review those assignment sheets. Literature review, we are going to talk about in the next video about going through Galileo, how to use that, how to look at different sources. So actually going to show you how to do some of those for those of you that aren't familiar with using Galileo and things like that. That's what we're going to do in the next video. So make sure if you have any questions that you are letting me know. Make sure that you are emailing me, and make sure that you are getting all of your work done and coming to class, because that is how you will be successful. So if anybody has any questions, just let me know.